Good evening, Facebook friends. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have some very exciting candidates who are running for mayor in one case of St. Paul, Minnesota, and we have the Green Party governor candidate for New Jersey. And these are incredible people, incredible candidates who are really leading the charge in their communities in struggles that are really symbolic of what we are struggling with all across the country, very much all across the world, but in particular in the form that it takes in the U.S. And we're going to start tonight with Seth Kaper-Dale, who is the candidate for governor in New Jersey. I believe this is his first race, at least that I know of. I had the great honor to meet him several months back as part of the presidential campaign trail, and I had the honor to do an event with him and actually hear him and meet him and see what an incredibly compelling and uplifting spokesperson he is for the struggles for social, economic, racial, and environmental justice. And Seth's background is as a pastor. In fact, he is co-pastor along with his wife, partner, at the Reformed Church, and they really embody what social justice is all about. And I'll just say briefly that I was really kind of astonished reading Seth's bio about how he and his group have created these wonderful services and institutions and organizations to actually meet the needs of the most vulnerable in our communities, with the idea that if we're meeting the needs of the most vulnerable, then we're meeting everybody's needs. And that really needs to be our guide. So just to name quickly, they started a fair trade organization, an after school, a summer camp, a sustainable, something to support caregivers. And generally have been working in the area of community development and political action. So really a person whose life has been dedicated to this work, and you will hear it in what Seth has to say. And it's a great honor to introduce Seth. Put your questions and your comments up on the Facebook page. If you post them, we're going to try to get to them in the latter half of our conversation with Seth. So go ahead, Seth. Take it away.
Stein, thank you so much for the chance to be with you tonight, and it is a great honor to be here. And you summed up a lot of the things that I have done. I decided to run for governor because I've learned over the last 16 years that I am a good administrator. You find out through the works that you do what you're good at, where your gifts are, and for me it's about administration. And for me, being a good administrator means recognizing gifts in others. It means dreaming up new dreams. It means finding funds to make things come about. And it means operating in a way that doesn't add anxiety. I think a lot of people fear administration because there's always anxiety built up in it. And I really operate without anxiety. And I felt that this state needs a break from the kind of anxiety administration that we've seen with Governor Christie. And so those are some of the positives that I thought about myself when I decided to run for governor.
And let's say this, because reading over your bio, it sounds like you've basically been committed. You've been leading a life of service for a long time. And I know you were at the Princeton Theological Seminary and graduated, quite some time ago and went immediately into service. I'm just curious to hear, was your calling to be of service something that was just there from the start? Were you born with this? Did you have a wake-up moment? As a kid, what was your driving passion? I'm just really interested, where people get their engines from who are committed to this kind of work.
So I grew up in the state of Vermont. My dad was a social worker and eventually became the commissioner of social services for the state. And my mother was a teacher and a community activist in many, many ways. So I would say that right from the beginning, I've been raised into a family that believes seriously in service. I then went to college I'd grown up in the church, but had never really connected church and social justice until I went to college in Michigan and started attending a church where a migrant farm kid had become a pastor. And the first sermon I ever heard preached, he'd been out midweek videotaping a blueberry field where migrant quarters were not being kept well for the pickers. And I went up to him after the sermon. I said, your church lets you do that? And he said, man, you got to read your Bible again. And that really set me off reading liberation theology and making me understand that social justice and even a Marxist reading of Christian scriptures and many scriptures fits into theology. And that set me down a road to move to Ecuador and then on to seminary. And my wife and I have committed to the type of church work that's all about saying the last are first and the first shall be last. And that kind of mentality has really worked its way into my political slogan, the last are first. I believe a wellspring from below is what's going to change this world, not a trickle down from the top.
And this reminds me that you've been very active in the sanctuary movement, and that in fact your church gave sanctuary to many people for a long period of time, and you were eventually able to actually work with government officials in order to stop their pursuit, in order to basically give them a stay of their deportation orders. Just say a word about that. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, so for 15 years, I fought a battle on behalf of hundreds of Indonesians who came to this country escaping the collapse of the Suharto regime, ethnic Chinese Christians who had escaped and ended up in the community where I happened to land as pastor. So I got personally invested in their story. I watched as they all registered after 9/11 because the government said people from large Muslim countries register or be considered terrorist fugitives. They went and registered, and because they registered, they became low-hanging fruit for our government's painful deportation policies. And so I fought for years on their behalf. I wrote legislation. I was in Washington constantly, and finally we had 9 individuals who were put on ankle monitors and were going to be deported at a given date. And we said, on the day you're to go and be deported, instead move into our church. And we had 9 dads in our church for 11 months until we worked things out with enforcement and removal operations in Washington and got stays of removal for all those individuals.
Amazing. Say a few words also while you're on it about your work on torture. I know that you are like vice president of an association. I don't remember whether it's clergy or it's interfaith, fighting against torture, specifically focused on solitary confinement in our jails. Say a word about that.
I have been active on the board of the National Religious Campaign Against Torture for many years now, I think 4 years. And during that time, we've worked to support getting a full disclosure of the report about the secret prisons that were put in place by our government after 9/11. We've worked to end torture as it's been expressed through the Guantanamo Bay situation, and now torture in our own backyard, which is solitary confinement. That's become our national passion. And we have here in New Jersey, in connection with NEARCAT, we have helped write legislation to end solitary as we know it today. We follow Juan Mendez's recommendations. He was the UN Special Rapporteur on torture, and he gave some specific guidelines, which became the basis for the legislation that we were able to get through the Senate and the Assembly in New Jersey, but it died on Governor Christie's desk. If I become governor, that will be signed into law. We won't have solitary confinement in New Jersey anymore.
Fabulous. And say a word while you're at it about police violence and what, how does your campaign speak to that?
Yeah. So I am deeply concerned about police violence and about all violence against Black lives. There's something that I would like folks to turn to, and there's a Facebook post I put out called "Why Black Lives Matter More Than My White Life." And I really believe that this is time for taking sides. It's about starting with those who are last. And in our society, the Black community has been made last, both by not only by police, but by all systems that have been put in place. And we need to stand up for Black lives in every way, shape, and form. 2 nights ago, I was in Newark as there was a consent decree being reviewed because the U.S. government stepped into Newark a couple years ago and said there were such abuses within the Newark policing system that it needed to be under a very strict review. So I went there as part of a community review board to review new policies that were being put in place. And I'm committed to doing that, to really being part of the oversight process as we seek to have police departments get up to speed on what it means to take seriously the racial bias that is built into the way police forces are living out their lives.
And Seth, I know that in the New Jersey, I guess in the last governor's race, something like 61% of people sat it out and did not vote. In this race, your opponent, the Democrat, is a Goldman Sachs banker, if I have that right. So it's not a long shot to say that you are the only progressive in the race, unless people consider Goldman Sachs bankers to be progressives. And I know there are a lot of neoliberals out there for whom that is as far as progressivism goes. But say a word about, the dynamics in your race and how you are essentially the voice for this agenda for people, planet, and peace over profit.
Mm-hmm. So hashtag only progressive running. And I am making that very, very clear that at this point, there is no other progressive in the race in New Jersey. The Democratic Party has made it easy for me. I think they make it easy every time, but this time it's like the poster boy of everything that's wrong with the neoliberal agenda. To not only have someone who gives speeches to Goldman Sachs, but actually someone who's made probably $1 billion or more by working at the highest levels of Goldman Sachs. That is who the Democrats handpicked. And when I say handpicked, I don't even mean the Democratic voters. I mean the Democratic bosses. There's a reason we're thought of as the soprano state. These bosses made their selection way back in October before any other candidate had even put their name in the hat to run for the primary. So those bosses handpicked who the Democrat was going to be. He then spent $20 million in the primary process, more than 10 times all the other candidates put together. And of course, he won. But he won with pitifully small numbers. Only 25% of registered Democrats came out to vote in that primary, and he won 48% of the 25%. So as far as I'm concerned, I am the first party. The Green Party is the first party in New Jersey. The second and third party are the Democrats and Republicans, and they can fight over the placement of second and third. But 61% of people sat it out last time, and I know that those 61% are sitting things out because they feel so bought when they look at the two-party duopoly of red and blue. They want nothing to do with it. I hope they want something to do with people and planet over profit.
Oh, Catherine McHugh says she hopes that you will be in the debates. Now, as I understand it, in New Jersey, you have to buy your way into the debates. This is democracy on sale. It's like they're not being subtle about it. This speaks volumes about what money means in our elections, that you have to actually outright buy your way into a debate. It's just staggering. Usually that's kind of like the subtext. Here they're just being explicit. So you have to raise what, $450,000? What exactly? Yeah. What do you do to get into a debate, and how can we help you get into a debate?
430,000 is the magic number, and every year it goes up. So probably 450 will be the number next time around, or even higher. And it is incredible. It's an incredible sum of money. I want to say, though, that with very small donations from lots of people, we're pushing 100,000 already. And that's a pretty big deal for the Green Party in New Jersey, to watch a candidate pushing $100,000 already, with a big boost from a nationwide collective that cares about seeing this happen in one state. We can get there. I really believe we can get there. I hate that we have to get there, but we can get there. And so let's get there and show the reds and the blues what it really looks like when the people rise up.
That's very exciting. I didn't know before just now that you had already gotten to $100,000. That is staggering to have raised that much money for a Green this early in the race. So I really want to encourage everybody out there, if it's $5, if it's $10, right, there are thousands of people watching. And if everybody chips in a little bit, we're going to be a big boost, and we're going to get Seth there. So this is really exciting. You can also go to Seth's website and sign up and be on the email newsletter so that you will be kept posted on exactly how he's doing in this very exciting race against, against the bankers and the billionaires. What's your website, Seth, so that people can catch?
Kaper-Dale-for-Governor.com. Kaper-Dale-for-Governor.com. Kaper-Dale-for Governor.com.
Okay, great, terrific. And Emma Stevens says, please donate to Seth. And Heather Warburton says, if everyone watching could please donate whatever they can, we can get Seth in the debates. And Christopher Wolf is saying, but also donate to Flint. And there was another question that shot by from Chris Murphy, posted twice. And he's saying, well, what would you do about the water if you were facing a water crisis like Flint?
Well, we are facing water crises. Newark water, New Brunswick water. The water is terrible. One of the things we need to do is take a serious look at the infrastructure of our water pipelines. And at the same time, let's get rid of the oil pipelines and the gas pipelines and put money into the pipelines that really need to be developed at this time. And that's the water infrastructure. So I am very serious about a number of policies that would help us with that. One thing is we have to re-enter the RGGI agreement, which was a regional greenhouse gas initiative agreement, which was giving us significant monies at one point to put toward renewable energy and to put toward healthy infrastructure projects. We pulled right out of that when Governor Christie became governor. So we need to get that money back. And we need to also get involved in public banking. That's a very big piece of my platform. If you look at it right now, for every dollar that we invest, we stick it into hedge funds that become $10 to build the next mother of all bombs, or to dig the next mine in the Philippines or Honduras, or to clear cut the next forest in Brazil. Instead, if we put $1 in, we could turn that into $10 for mass transit, for water pipes, for a renewable energy future, and for student loans. That's the kind of thing I want to do.
Great. And then Remington Howell says, how can you improve the lives of people with disabilities like me who are hard of hearing and vision impaired?
Remington, thank you for that question. I would say that I have spent time already with a number of groups that are concerned about, in particular, job opportunities for folks with disabilities. And I was shocked at the high percentage, and I believe it was more than 60% of folks with disabilities in New Jersey who want to be employed, who cannot get employment right now. And so I want to look at that as a staggeringly high number of unemployment and come up with plans that can help people get jobs that fit within their abilities, and not have them lose out on funding that they need for basic services if they get work. That was a big issue for people. And so Remington, I'm committed to that.
Great. Christopher Wolf saying, that we all need to work together. Jessica Clayton is saying to come on out and meet you this weekend. Can you tell us do you know your schedule in advance? I know it can be hard to keep up with.
Yeah.
So meet you.
This weekend I will be down the Jersey Shore, and I'm blanking on the township right now at this moment, but I'll be down the Jersey Shore because I'm looking at building codes along pristine waters and along waterfronts, and looking at the ways that runoff in those locations have created significant problems within our water sources and our waterways. So that's where I'll be this weekend. And
Kelton Jetter wants to know, what can we do about all the cancer-causing chemicals in our personal care products?
I'm going to have to think about that one. I don't have a ready answer for you on that, other than to say that one thing that's already become clear to me is that the state of New Jersey has a tremendous number of environmental organizations that are doing incredible work, and they've been avoided by previous administrations. I'm somebody who wants to listen to the experts, and I know that the experts are often within the nonprofit world already doing their work and feeling stifled by government. I want to sit and listen to them. Hopefully I'll have an answer that comes from them next time you ask that question.
And to piggyback on that, one of the ways that, as elected officials, we can allow those voices to be heard is to, by stopping the revolving door, and the kinds of appointments that you would be making, I'm sure, as governor, the people you would be appointing to your regulatory commissions would ensure that they are not bought by the Monsantos and by the Dow Chemicals and so on. So just by being an honest public servant, as opposed to a money grubbing politician as we've known them, the right thing happens, and it's just kind of like baked into the DNA of public service as Greens. So I have no doubt. These two fight for the common people and the planet, and that was from Lori Root Riley. Tom Violet says Seth will be in Forked River. Andrea Radich says, I like this guy. I can't vote because I'm not in his state, but I will donate. Thank you so much, Andrea. And Kim Lizwiski Mute says, New Jersey needs single-payer health care. Say a word about the state of health care in New Jersey, Seth.
That is my biggest issue in my campaign. So if you look at my website, you'll see that New Jersey single-payer Medicare for all is front and center in what I stand for. And I'm the only candidate who's talking about it. There was one fairly progressive Democrat that was running and didn't do so well in the primary, who also had a single-payer plan. But I'm deeply committed to this, because not only is it important for healthcare being a human right that we all deserve, but I've come to see that the reason that we're economically enslaved in this state is because we're enslaved to the health insurance industry. About 31 cents of every dollar is going straight to the profit and overhead of these major corporations. We think we could bring it down to between 3 and 5% as the overhead to run a New Jersey single-payer Medicare for all. We would be able to easily have $15 an hour minimum wage if companies didn't have to freak out about whether their insurance was going to go through the roof the next year to those for-profit companies. The pension plan that we're so stuck in this state for our state workers, the reason we're stuck is because every year the state has to try to both contribute to the pension and take care of out-of-control for-profit health insurance. So if we've got that under control, the pension plan can be fully funded. People can work 40 hours a week without getting cut off at 28 because their employers are afraid of taking on another full-time worker for whom they're going to have to be responsible with health insurance. Over and over and over, we will see a tremendous economic revival in this state if we could wake up and take care of people's health care.
Great. And Barbara says New Jersey is trying to hold back the pipelines. Tell us what's happening on that struggle.
Yeah, so not too long ago, maybe 2 months ago, I took part in a 90-mile walk. I just did the first couple miles and then joined up again on day 4, so nobody get too excited. I didn't do all 90 miles. But it was a 90-mile walk along the Pilgrim Pipeline location. The Pilgrim Pipeline has not been approved, but big for-profit companies are trying to put in another big oil pipeline that runs almost the whole length of the state of New Jersey. In addition, we have a gas pipeline that was just put in under the Pine Barrens by one of those so-called commissions that was supposed to be making sure the Pine Barrens, which is one of our pristine areas, stays pristine. One of the appointees by the governor, or many of the appointees by the governor, decided it was okay to put a gas pipeline under that pristine area. So we need to stop these pipelines. We have issues with FERC, as so many of the states do, because that regulatory agency can work with pipelines that are connected state to state. But we can come up with some ways to stop FERC and to slow down this madness, hopefully until there's a change in Washington.
And April Devine is saying, what about your policies on cannabis?
Yeah, so I have gotten to a place where I feel very strongly that recreational and medicinal cannabis needs to be legalized. And my reasons for that are both, one, because I believe in the last being first. And when I look at why cannabis is illegal in the first place, it's based on incredibly racist statements and beliefs that got passed into our system decades ago. And that has led to the war on drugs in a lot of ways. It has poisoned the Black community with mass incarceration. It has just been something that has led us down a terrible road. So I'm for the legalization of cannabis, firstly, because I'm concerned that Black lives matter. And I don't like the ways that cannabis has so disenfranchised Black people. And also because I can't stand to watch white kids in Colorado making a mint off cannabis while I'm watching African-American kids in New Jersey starting down a road toward a future of incarceration because they smoke a joint.
Kathy Butari is saying, our children's education is being harmed by high-stakes standardized testing. Will you eliminate that?
Yes, high-stakes standardized testing is a horrible thing, and that is the result of Democrats as much as it is the result of Republicans. It's big money Dems who've turned our public education system into a high-stakes testing ground, and I'm just so offended by it, it needs to stop. My mother's a teacher, and I can tell you that I think she retired earlier than she would have because she got so sick of having to play games that had nothing to do with the career that she had wanted to go into. Instead, we're driven by profit-making, standardized testers.
Great. Joshua Hellman says, Seth is an awesome candidate. And Christopher Wolf says, please help. Nancy Foster says, exactly. And Kathy Butari says, thank you, Seth. So I think we got a lot of agreement out there. In just the couple minutes that we have left, Seth, tell us why your struggle in the state of New Jersey matters to everyone. Why should everyone go to your website right now, sign up to Help You Phone Bank, and throw $5 into the pot? Why should, or more if you're capable of doing that, if you're in a position to do that? Why should this matter to everyone?
So in the United States this year, there are only 2 gubernatorial races, period, Virginia and New Jersey. So we are in a unique position where by standing strong for a green gubernatorial candidate, you might find that of the 2 states that have gubernatorial races, one of them goes to the Green Party. This would draw tremendous attention to the fact that it's time for the duopoly to collapse. So I believe that if you could all get on board with me, we could watch something happen at the state level, at a big state. I mean, we have a big population. We are a fairly strong economic center. New Jersey is a significant player, and you could help us topple the duopoly. And when you throw in the fact that the Goldman Sachs candidate represents the Democrats, it just makes it the perfect place for the theatrics of resistance to play out. So join me in the theater. And it's more than just a theater for theater's sake. It's theater that can lead to a real new administrator coming into Trenton. I'm the only progressive running.
Absolutely. And in a race that is kind of the poster child of what politics in America has become, where the Democrats are basically, the bankers and the billionaires. And there is a political vacuum to be filled for the least among us, for the people who are struggling to get out of debt, to get jobs, to have decent schools, to have health care. The Greens have become the voices here. And it's very exciting, Seth. Thank you so much for sharing your campaign and this very exciting race. And again, one more time, the website so people can go to it. Kaper-Dale4governor.com. Okay, great. Thank you so very much, and we hope to hear. We'll have you back before next November. So
I can't wait to see you, Dr. Stein, in Newark for the Green Convention in mid-July. All right. It's
going to be a great celebration. So glad you'll be there as our shining star. Thank you so much. Okay, great. Thank you to Seth, and we're going to turn now to our next awesome guest of the evening, and that's Elizabeth Dickinson, who is running for mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota. This is her second race, first for mayor, that is. In the first race she ran, which was something like 10 years ago, she did great, sort of fresh out of the starting gate. She came in with 20% of the vote, which was just a little bit behind the incumbent, who gained 27% of the vote. So she did really, really well. She is a organizer. She is a powerhouse. And I'm going to let her tell us a little bit about her background. And I'll just say that she has the distinction, as running as independents and Greens and as non-corporate candidates, we often don't get the endorsements of the bigger advocacy groups, but Elizabeth is that much of a powerhouse that she already has the endorsement of the Sierra Club in St. Paul, so more power to her for that. So with that, let me bring on Elizabeth, and welcome, Elizabeth. Tell us what got you to be running in this race for mayor at this time.
Well, first, thank you so much, Jill, for having me on. I really appreciate it. What got me into this race was actually two younger Green women who came to me between Christmas and New Year's and said, there's a hole in the race and we think you should fill it. And I had a sense of excitement as they described the race because there was no woman in the race and there was obviously no Green in the race. So I took a month to think about it, and the excitement stayed with me. And so I decided to jump in. What I realized, besides being the only woman and the only Green, is that there really wouldn't be anybody substantially carrying any kind of energy or environmental focus. And that really has been the focus for so much of my, especially volunteer activist work. So I jumped in. I have a plan to put solar on the schools, which would save money for the city. And I've been talking about trying to get more solar and wind manufacturers to town because it's growing 12 times faster than any other industry. And I can tell you 12 years ago, people would just kind of go, oh, that's nice, but what are your other issues? Now at the door, people go, yes, absolutely. When can we start? So there's a lot of excitement about carrying that kind of message, as well as the other things that I'm talking about.
Yeah, so say just a little bit more about that, because I found that was really interesting. You don't just have sort of a vague plan. You have a really specific plan about putting solar on the rooftops of, what is it, 70 schools?
Yes, yes.
And that this would be a community resource. This would be run either by the schools or by collectives, that this would be, sort of installed community-wide, and that it would be basically schools could have this installed for free. Is that right? I mean, it would be installed.
Well, there's a number of different ways of doing it. We have community solar laws here. So what that means, just very simply, is that if you can't afford to put on solar yourself, you can always buy a subscription. So if it was installed on a church or a school, you could buy a subscription, get the percentage of energy that you use from that, and save money on your bill. And so what I'm proposing is to do community solar. And I know all of the schools are strapped for cash. Sometimes, they don't want to invest in it. But there's a way that you can actually lease it to developers. It pays you back more if you own it. But if you lease it, you can still make money, and you can still sell subscriptions to teachers, to kids at the school, to lower income folk, and pay for it through your bill, saving money right out of the gate from the get-go, because solar power has come down so much in price in just the last 10 years.
And so, tell people quickly before we turn to questions, just a little bit about what some of the other issues are for you. I know in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the tragedy of Philando Castile, took place. And then recently the police officer who murdered him was let off free. How is that playing out in your campaign, and what kinds of solutions are you calling for?
Well, yes, that was a really tragic case and a tragic miscarriage of justice. Falcon Heights, which is a suburb of St. Paul, it wasn't actually the St. Paul police who were involved in that shooting, but nevertheless, it was still something that really deeply affected the community. There were a lot of protests, and there's a lot of talk about how we can deal with something like that in the future. So one of the things that I'm calling for is more de-escalation techniques. making sure that there's more implicit and explicit bias training. I've been to a number of community forums where sometimes you'll have kids go, they'll say to the police chief, well, how do we know that you're doing what you say you're doing? So one of the things that I'm proposing, because I know they're doing some implicit and explicit bias training, I am proposing that those kids actually get invited into the training, not obviously to the confidential parts, but there have to be parts that they can be in and that they can give some feedback on how it can be strengthened and made better. One of the things that I know is that within the Black community, if you're over 35, you have a different view of the police than if you're under 35. At one of the community forums, a gentleman stood up and he sort of went like this to the folks on the panel, and he said, "You're listening to the Black Ministerial Alliance and the NAACP. Well, they're not the ones out here getting shot." And so I think that there's a real need to bring in younger people into this training, because they're the ones that deal with it on a daily basis. They're the ones, younger kids of color, they're the ones who are being pulled over. They're the ones who are being pulled over, 50 times over 2 years, as Philando Castile was, for things like broken taillights. And so I think that we need to be developing better relationships between the police. Trust means that you give somebody the benefit of the doubt in a questionable situation. And there is not a lot of trust now. And I think we need to build up that trust. And we don't do that by being in silos. We do that by coming together as a community and talking about solutions and talking about the kinds of training that police officers are getting to make sure that it is really reflecting the culture and the centuries of institutional racism that have been in our society.
Great. Let's see. Troy Astro says, I voted for you, Dr. Stein, in the presidential because I'm sick of voting Democrat and too broke to be Republican. People are really tired of being thrown under the bus. So you got a great green here to vote for in this race. Nev Neskoska says, a degree in psychology and communications would help for police. Lori Root Riley says, let's demilitarize the police. And let me encourage everyone out there, throw up your comments, your questions. Makes it more fun and interesting to get lots of your feedback here. Christopher Wolf says, thanks, because we do need to do something about policing the police. So what about so-called police review boards, where the citizens have the ability to actually review what's going on and the power to influence police hiring and firing and so on?
We actually do have a police civilian review board, and the latest controversy was actually because there were police on that review board. And so recently there was a big initiative to take them off so that they could be truly independent in terms of the kinds of feedback that they give. So that's something that I've supported. Can I talk a little bit about the 15 Now campaign, which is really exciting?
Yes, do.
Well, one of the things that I really support is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And what's exciting is that Minneapolis, I'm in St. Paul, and Minneapolis is a separate city. Minneapolis is already taking steps toward that. What the early review has said is that if they do that, it will lift 71,000 families out of poverty. Because we're a slightly smaller city in St. Paul, I still know the numbers would be equivalent. And I always say, I support affordable housing, I support transit, but there is no one thing that we could do that would raise more people out of poverty than raising the minimum wage. And so I've been talking about that to everyone at the doors. Everyone seems to support it, from a moral standpoint, a moral and spiritual standpoint, and from a practical standpoint, in terms of lifting the people who most need the help. I'm really excited to support that, and it's one of the things that I've said in the first 30 days. I would be sitting down with the city council to say, how can we get this into our city?
Great. And let's see, Kelton Jetter says yes on 15. Chris Murphy says, what about environmental health care? This connection between the environment and our health.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad he brought that up. Thank you so much for the question. A few years ago, I was actually an advocate and a lobbyist at the Capitol for Healthy Legacy, and I wanted to say that out loud for the gentleman who was asking. There's a nationwide movement. I think it's called Healthy Legacy, depending on the states, and the whole purpose of that is to eliminate toxic chemicals from household products. One of the things I worked on was getting BPA out of baby bottles, trying to get toxic fire retardants out of electronics, and trying to get a really sane pesticide policy, a right to know policy. And I can tell you that when I was at the legislature, one of the hardest things to get any traction on was the pesticide bill. And Monsanto, the American Chemistry Council, they literally flew in lobbyists to Minnesota from all over, and they put them up at hotels for well over a month, just to try and defeat anything to do with getting any kind of sane chemical policy. And I think there were just a couple of us working on it. I was the only person talking to Republicans about this. And I used to have people say, oh, I bet you couldn't get anybody to vote for BPA, getting BPA out of baby bottles. And I said, no, I actually got 1/3 of the Republican caucus to vote to get BPA out of baby bottles. Because if you really listen to people and you're respectful and you set out the arguments, you can sometimes change hearts and minds, and especially where children are concerned. I remember one lawmaker I went into, and he was surrounded by pictures of children and grandchildren. And I just asked him about them, and he got very quiet. And then he said, they use oil in plastic, don't they? And I said, yes. And he said, I don't believe we should be using oil in products that affect kids. And I just went, wow. And I got his vote. So, sometimes you can make progress. And that's one of the things I'm talking about. Things could be very dire at the national level. They're not much better at the state level, but cities can still do things. I was at a climate action planning meeting, and there were national people there back in the winter. And I said, why are you here? And they said exactly what I've just said. It's really bad at the national level. It's not great at the state level. We are putting all of our energy and hopes and dreams into what the city can do for climate action planning, because that's where all of the examples are going to be in the future. And that's where there's still some autonomy to get this stuff done.
Exactly. And in the interest of getting that stuff done, we want to be sure that we get you elected. And I know that you have you have candidates in the race who are raising a lot of money. You have a You've got a grassroots network, so you don't need the money like what they have, but you need some money. And I just really, again, want to encourage people to throw something into the hat. You can see what a dynamite green candidate this is. Elizabeth really knows her stuff. She's got a great team. She really knows her policy. She has plans. She is a candidate for environmental, social, economic, and racial justice. This is who we are as Greens, and it's really great for us to just throw a little something into the hat. Tell people where they can do that, Elizabeth. What's your website? Where can people go?
If you just go to elizabethdickinson.org, and Dickinson is Dickinson, like the poet. There's a donate button. You can donate through PayPal. Right now, we're trying to raise some money for lawn signs. It costs between $5 to $6 per lawn sign. So we are really happy to take small donations. Obviously, I don't take any money from corporate PACs. And it would be incredibly helpful. I can accept up to $1,000. I know that's out of reach for a lot of people, but the small donations really, really matter. They're incredibly helpful. Everyone on my team is a volunteer. We're not paying for salaries or anything like that. All of the money is going to directly what we're going to need and things that you're going to see in the field, like literature or signs. So it's very, very direct. So you will make a difference. We want to get out close to 900 signs. There are 7 wards in the city. The city is 300,000. So 800 signs, 8 or 900 signs is not that many, but they're pretty darn expensive at $5 or $6 a piece. So, so anything like that will really, really help. Thank you for asking.
I want to give a shout out to one of the people who commented on Facebook, and that's Samantha Priest-Dinson, who is another amazing.
She's wonderful.
She's incredible. Another green woman, another really strong green woman who is running for city council in Minneapolis, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Samantha's just our total powerhouse. She organized all kinds of things after the Philando Castile verdict. I went to at least one of them, and she has just vowed never to stop fighting until there is real change in the system. And I just think she's tremendous. She's a very, very articulate spokesperson, and people should look her up.
And it's great to have such a strong team of green women who are leading the charge in Minnesota, and really for all of us all around the country. I want to give a shout out also to Brandon Long, who is assisting tonight as well as commenting on the Facebook. So when you see me looking down here, I'm just checking the feed here to pick up on the comments. And his comment was, tell people about ranked choice voting. This is another.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. Oh, well, we have ranked choice voting.
Is in this incredible position for being the only woman among 6 candidates, I believe, 6 or 7 candidates. She's the only one. She's in a very distinctive position to start with. And, you know, having ranked choice voting really makes her a major contender. So this is another one of those races where we can really win it. If we just rally and everybody gives a little from around the country, we got some breakthrough material here. Okay, take it away, Elizabeth.
All right. So yes, there are 6 men in the race. Some of them are probably not as viable as others. What I need to do is to have enough first choice votes to be in the top 3. So basically, if I can get somewhere between 26 to 34% of the vote, I could win on second choice votes. Because if you know, with ranked choice voting, you have to get to 51% to win. And with 6 or 7 people in the race, that's virtually mathematically impossible. So they'll look at the candidate with the least amount of votes, and they will transfer all of those votes to each voter's second choice. And once they're transferred, they'll see if somebody reaches 51%. If not, they'll look at the next candidate with the least amount of votes and transfer each of those votes to each of those voters' second choice. As long as I can be in the top 3, and there isn't a huge gap between, between people, I believe I can win this. And so it would be quite historic, because I would be not only the first green, but the first woman mayor that St. Paul has ever had. And I believe, because the guys don't really, aren't thinking about the system, I am at every door. If somebody has already declared for someone else, I say, can I be your second choice? Everyone says yes. So I think that there's a real shot at this. And I would invite everyone to be part of history and throw a little money this way to make it really successful.
It could really happen. Tell us a little bit about the needs of women in St. Paul.
Well, there's definitely been some protests at Planned Parenthood. We've got a very strong Planned Parenthood facility here. And frankly, the attacks on Planned Parenthood have been very distressing. But I can say that a lot of women turn out who are pro-choice on behalf of those. That's very important. We are also starting, they are resurrecting the Equal Rights Amendment for women. And I will be going to some fundraisers, I think, in the fall for that. Betty Folliard is somebody who's been organizing and working for that for decades. And we're going to be starting that campaign again to have an equal rights amendment, recognizing the equality of women added to the Constitution, which I think is so long overdue and so obvious. I can't believe that we still have to fight for it, but we do.
Ganul Masana says, why people keep counting vote to Republican or Democrat? I don't want to see them anymore on the government. Time to move on. Yes, I think a lot of us agree with that. Daniel Goheen says, ranked choice voting. Brad Stiegel says, thank you, Elizabeth. I finally understand how ranked choice voting works. That's
great. Good.
And there's good news today, by the way, from Maine, where ranked choice voting was passed at the state level during this last election. It was passed, but then the legislature began to fight it and was trying to repeal it because ranked choice voting, it upsets the apple cart. It really forces incumbents to actually compete. It takes things out of just, the candidate with the most money or the most advertising gets the race. So at any rate, in Maine, they just had a big victory today, and they essentially pushed back at the repeal effort. So it's very exciting. The battle isn't over, but it's going very well. Let's see. So Nia Dallavalle says, Elizabeth, you are the candidate we need. Jeffrey Kofelt says, it's hard not to listen to all of the progress being made in Minnesota and look back in disgust at the damage that Scott Walker has done to my state. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think what he's saying there is that, Minnesota and Wisconsin, are very similar in many ways, but Wisconsin has really been held back by its very conservative government.
Yes.
Any thoughts about that, Elizabeth?
Well, I think, there were a lot of people from Minnesota who went, during the union busting attempts and went over and protested in Wisconsin. And it's, it just shows how much damage can be done when you have a leader at the top who is determined to get rid of some of the protections that other people have worked so hard to get and to maintain. And I'm definitely a strong union supporter because it's unions that gave us the 40-hour week. It's unions that have done a lot of the work to, to make sure that people are paid decently. And, unions have known that I'm definitely a friend of theirs. And in fact, that some of the unions have totally stayed out of endorsing in this race because they don't want to get in the way of the ranked choice voting, which I think is pretty interesting. There's some positive things happening.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's remarkable if labor holds back because
some of them have. Some of them have endorsed, but some of them are just saying we're gonna sit this out because a number of you have said to us that it tilts the playing field, and we'd like to keep the playing field even and see how this ranked choice voting works out.
And it's especially interesting because labor, it's very hard for labor to make a green endorsement.
Yes.
And when they endorse, they're usually forced to go sort of with the establishment. So by making a non-endorsement, that's pretty cool. Fingers crossed that
yes,
stay there. How did you swing the Sierra Club endorsement? Because that's very unusual too.
Well, I was the last candidate to screen. And I wanted to be the last candidate to screen. And I went in there, and I've been a Sierra Club member. And I talked about the last race, actually. And I said, even though I didn't win last time, I changed some of the course of the city because the candidate who won adopted some of my platform. And one part of my platform was saying that we needed a sustainability and environmental coordinator for the city. And people have said to me sort of have said to me quietly that the sustainability and environmental coordinator for the city owes her job to me, because when I was eliminated in the primary, which we will not have this time with ranked choice, but when I was eliminated last time in the primary, the mayor who won adopted that. And frankly, the sustainability and environmental coordinator has made a lot of progress. 25% of the municipal buildings, I think, are going to go for solar. Those are the buildings that the city owns. You know, I'm focusing now on schools and stuff. The other thing that I really hit hard in my last campaign was the idea of getting more out of the franchise fees. Franchise fees, when you have a franchise with a utility, it's essentially giving them the monopoly to serve the community. And I said that we should get more franchise fees, and that we should get more from the franchise agreement. Mm-hmm. And before, they had gone in, when they had to renegotiate it, they had basically just kind of let the utility dictate. This time they sent in, after I just really hit it on the campaign trail, they went in and negotiated the highest franchise fees in the country, which is the third largest source of income for the city. So it was a really big deal. So I went in and said to Sierra, these are some of the things that I accomplished by running. And the fact is, nobody would be talking about any of these environmental things if I wasn't there. You know, and I talked about the work that I had done to clean up the coal burning plants, the fact that I started a group called Clean Energy Now, and we got this huge victory because 2 of the local coal burning plants transformed to natural gas back in the early 2000s. And since the 1970s Clean Air Act, there had only been 3 in the entire country that had happened. So I've been incredibly, effective and just a leader for a very, very long time on issues. And I think that leadership was just really undeniable to them. And they had to know that the depth of my platform, the depth of the specificity of how to get solar on the schools, with rebates, without rebates, owning it, not owning it. All of those things I think were really, really compelling. And they made sure that they said in the announcement that I was not a protest candidate and that they considered me viable. And they made sure that this endorsement came out before the Democrat convention so that it would influence people, which was also really important. And it was unanimous. So, and it had to go through national. So, it was a win-win on so many different levels.
Joshua Hellman says it's good to see that the Sierra Club isn't completely lost to Democrats. Kelton Jetter says donating to Elizabeth from Texas. And
awesome. Thank you, Texas.
Aaron Kula says it only takes a half minute to make the donation. So go for it, folks. Ganul Masana says, I'm a Turkish American and I want to be a part of this team. Go Greens. Tell us what's the status of the struggle for immigrant rights and against deportation. And we'll finish with this one.
That's a great question. Well, in St. Paul, I was part of the team back in 2004 that came up with what we called the Police INS Separation Ordinance. Now, that was Immigration and Naturalization Services. Now that we're talking about ICE. And essentially what that said is that anyone who works for the city, whether they're police or fire or in any other capacity, are not allowed to ask about immigration status. So police who stop you for a traffic violation, and they might suspect that you're an illegal immigrant, you're an undocumented person. They're not allowed to ask about that. And they're not supposed to cooperate informally with ICE. So we have some of those protections already, and they are very strongly supported by our community. In addition to that, there are a number of churches that are doing what Seth's church has done, which are establishing sanctuary churches to be able to shelter people who might be under threat of deportation. So I believe that we're going to stand up to any kind of bullying or threats that Donald Trump might make against sanctuary cities. And, certainly I expect to be standing up against that as well. One of the things that we heard immediately after Trump got elected was that there were parents afraid to send their kids to school because they were afraid that ICE might come and deport them. And so there was literally a downtick in kids of color, immigrant kids going to school because they were afraid that families would get separated. And that is just not acceptable. It is not acceptable. And people should not have to live in fear. And I've been a really strong supporter of immigrants. They contribute enormously. There's been a lot of, there's a professor called Dr. Bruce Corey, who is from Concordia University. He has talked about all of the economic contributions, in addition to everything else, that immigrants make to our community. And if anybody is looking for some good statistics about that, look up his work. But I'm a strong supporter of immigrants and want to do everything to make sure that people don't have to live in fear.
Great. Kimberly Bain says, just donated from Utah. John Calvin Bird the third.
Thank you, Utah.
South Central Los Angeles here, and Lori Root Riley, Houston here. So as you can see, Elizabeth, you are speaking to and for people all over this country who are ready to stand up and say it's time for an America and a world that works for all of us. Once again, tell people where they can go to help your really exciting campaign as the only woman candidate running among 7 in a choice vote. This is, it doesn't get better than this.
It doesn't get any better.
So, let's make it happen. Let's seize this incredible window of opportunity. So tell people once more, where can they go to kick in, and stay tuned and get on the mailing list and help make the phone calls be part of the phone banking teams, and let's make it happen. And they should go where? To
ElizabethDickinson.org.
Awesome. Okay, great.
Yes.
So with that, we'll conclude for tonight. Thank you so much for coming on, Elizabeth, and we'll hear from you again as things go forward, and keep up your great work. You're blazing the trail for us all. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for tuning in tonight. Take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Green news is good news.